Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. If you guys listened last week to the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast, you will remember that one of the segments I did was I picked a team from each conference that I thought wouldn't have made the NCAA tournament in 2020 that I think is going to make it in 2021. And what I'm going to do for today's segment of the show is keep up that theme of picking one team from each conference, because you guys also know when I started this show, I said I want to talk about as many teams as possible, and I want to talk about teams that really not necessarily every other sports podcast you listen to will talk about, and that's basically why I'm going to be continuing this theme for the college basketball portions of this show, is like asking a question and then answering it with one team from each conference that I think fits that question. And today, once again, I'm going over one team from each conference that is under the most pressure to succeed during the 2020-2021 season. So I'm going to pick each team from each conference, talk a little bit about it, and so without further ado, let's get this thing started. Little music, and here we go. The first team I want to talk about is DePaul from the Big East. And last year was very interesting for DePaul because in the preseason, I actually picked them to finish 8th in the Big East, which was a little higher than most. Like, not everyone else really thought that they finished that high. But not because of the lack of talent, just because they're DePaul, and they haven't been good in forever. Well, it turns out, last year, during the non-conference portion of the season, people were talking about DePaul as an NCAA tournament team. They went into Iowa and won. They went into Minnesota and won. They went into Boston College and won. And they had some, there was talent on that team pretty clearly. Like, I actually thought they were an NCAA tournament team at one time last year. It was really like right before conference play started. And then they end up going 3-15 in Big East conference play. And it's not like, if you would have told me in the beginning of the season that DePaul would have finished 3-15 and last in the Big East, I would have thought, okay, there's nothing too surprising there, no big deal. But this team actually did show some potential during the non-conference portion of the season. And the Big East was such a strong league this past season, right? That I really do think all they had to do in order to secure an NCAA tournament bid was really just go like 9-9 or 10-8 at most, and still they end up going 3-15. Now, next year, they do bring back some talent. Charlie Moore, their point guard, should be back. They also bring back Romeo Weems, who's a guy that could possibly be a NBA pick and a former top 100 recruit. Devin Gage as well. So there's going to be some talent on this team, but I think if you're DePaul and Dave Leto, if you can't win with the talent you have, then when are you ever going to win? And I think if I'm DePaul, that's why I think Dave Leto is under a lot of pressure for this season. During the offseason, he actually signed a contract extension, which I didn't get at all. But I think if I was a DePaul fan, I would be on the bandwagon of, if we don't make the NCAA tournament this season, Dave Leto should be fired. Moving on to the next team on the list, and we'll head to the Big 12, and I want to talk about Texas. And last season for Texas didn't really go too well, to start at least. They, I don't want to say Shaka Smart was on the hot seat going into last season, but the rumblings were starting to get going about his job, and Texas fans haven't really been that happy with his performance over the last couple seasons. And personally, I do believe that if COVID-19 would have never happened, then I don't think Shaka Smart would be the head basketball coach of Texas. I think when you looked at Texas's resume closely last year, you'd have been able to tell that they didn't deserve to be an NCAA tournament team. They went on a late 4 to 5 game winning streak at the back end of the season, but you could clearly tell that the teams they beat during that winning streak wasn't enough to get them into the NCAA tournament. And also, when you look at Texas a little closer, they lost that last game to Oklahoma State by 25 points at home. And when you do that, I just don't think you look like an NCAA tournament team to me. But the reason as to why Texas is so interesting going into next season is because they bring not only everyone back, but they also, just a commercial going in the music, but they also add guys. They bring in Greg Brown, a former top 10 recruit, which sounds all well and good, but we all know the history Texas has in terms of combining winning and top 100 recruits. That's usually not the end result. They bring back guards Matt Coleman, their starting point guard, shooter Jace Febris, Combo guard Courtney Ramey. Also Andrew Jones, who I'm so happy to see him back on the floor. He's an electric scorer. They bring back Donovan Williams, a young guard as well that I really like. And then in the front court, Jericho Sims, Gerald Liddell, Greg Brown, Royce Hamm. This team is just scattered with former top 100 recruits. And Shaka Smart has plenty of talent, but in the Big 12, which is going to be very good this season, at the top when you have Kansas, Texas Tech, Baylor, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, and Cade Cunningham as well. I think when you look at this Texas team, they really have to make the NCAA tournament. They really have to do well because Shaka Smart really hasn't lived up to expectations since he's gotten the job at Texas. And I do think this should maybe be his best team since he's got there because there is just too much depth and too much talent. Okay, moving on to the next team. Let's go to the Pac-12, and the team I think is Arizona. Low-key, if I was an Arizona fan, I don't think I would be very happy with Sean Miller and his performance in terms of on-floor results over the last couple seasons. I don't think there was any reason for this past year for Arizona not have been like a top 12 team. I think they were the most talented team in the Pac-12, but you clearly saw their freshmen just weren't good enough, and they didn't get better as the season went on. And I think you could kind of also tell Nico Mannion I don't want to say he quit on Sean Miller, but he kind of did. Like, he just wasn't really good. You remember the game against UCLA? Arizona was winning the whole game, and that was the game on the road, and they still found a way to lose. They also got blown out at their building by UCLA. They also lost to Washington on the road, and we know that Washington really wasn't good this past season. They lost to Arizona State. That was a game that they were leading by a lot in. They lost to USC. They lost to Oregon twice. Arizona just really wasn't good this past season, and there was no reason why they shouldn't have been good. You also look at it from Arizona's perspective. Their non-freshman players just didn't really develop. Last year, their whole team was Nico Mannion, Zeke Naji, and Josh Green, and those three guys weren't all the time that good, especially Josh Green. Like, he was very inconsistent. So I think when you look at Arizona, the question is, okay, what exactly did they bring in to get better? They bring in James Akinjo, the point guard from Georgetown. He should be eligible right away. I think Arizona's in a solid spot if he's their starting point guard. They also bring in another transfer, Jordan Brown from Nevada, former 5-star recruit. They bring back Jamarl Baker as a shooter as well. And I have heard some very good things about some of their international prospects that should be pretty good. But Sean Miller's he's an interesting coach, man. Like, I understand why Arizona fans aren't really happy with him because when he couldn't make a Final Four, that's when I questioned Arizona fans for really criticizing him. But when he's not making the tournament and when he's really underachieving and when he brings in a preseason top 10, 12 team that would have ended the season as like a 7 or 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, that's a big problem. And I think Arizona is under a little bit of pressure going into next season. Okay, moving on to the next team on this list, we will head to the ACC, and I want to talk about NC State. Now, I like Kevin Keatts as a basketball coach. I think he really deserved to get this NC State job. I think he did a phenomenal job during his time at UNC Wilmington, and I even think he did a solid job during his first year in Raleigh. But the problem is, over the last 2 seasons, I don't think Kevin Keatts has done that good of a job. Like, NC State should have been a tournament team the last 2 seasons, but they haven't. With the core they had of Markel Johnson and Funderburk and Beverly and CJ Price and Daniels and Torin Dorn, like guys that were there, year 7 as well, like guys that were there for such a long time but weren't really able to develop and improve. And I think that's been kind of a problem for NC State and Kevin Keatts. When you look at their team this year, they do lose a little bit. They lose Markel Johnson, who was their starting point guard for the past couple seasons. They lose Josh Hall, who was a guy that people thought could have played in the NBA. He decided to skip college and play professionally. That's the second time in a row that has happened to NC State. As Jalen Lake, it occurred with him last year. But at the same time, NC State does bring back Devin Daniels. They do bring back Jericho Helms. They do bring back DJ Funderburk. And I think if you build a core around those top 3 guys, NC State should be a tournament team. Also, the ACC isn't that good. It really wasn't good last year, and I think that's another reason as to why I was just so disappointed as a whole with the NC State Wolfpack last year, is that not only did I think they were talented and I thought they could be pretty good, but the rest of the ACC was down. teams like Miami and Wake and Pitt and Virginia Tech and Georgia Tech and Clemson and BC, like besides that group at the top, all of those teams weren't really that good. So I did think NC State had a little bit of a chance to succeed and make the tournament and maybe even go on a little bit of a run. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I do think if Kevin Keatts wants to get NC State fans back on his good side, he needs to lead the 2020 Wolfpack, or 2021 Wolfpack, to the NCAA tournament. All right, let's go to the SEC. And I think you guys all know who I'm going to say is under the most pressure going into the 2021 season in the Southeastern Conference basketball, and that is Mike White at Florida. Last year, I think I am comfortable saying that Florida was the most disappointing team in this whole sport. I thought they had everything. A point guard pass first in Nebhart, a shooter in Noah Locke, an NBA defensive-worthy combo guard in Scotty Lewis, a do-it-all guy in Keontae Johnson, and a very good big man in Kerry Blackshear. Well, unfortunately for Florida, it really didn't work out that way, as, yeah, they would have made the tournament as like a 10 seed, but if you just watched them, you knew that this team wasn't any good. And I am curious to see if they do, Blackshear is definitely gone, and there is rumblings about Andrew Nebhart possibly leaving. I am wondering if maybe Florida, gets better from maybe losing some of those guys, and maybe if they do have an established rotation, they could be good. But the bottom line is Mike White didn't use his personnel well at all last year. He had personnel that he could have just ran down the floor with and really adopt to the modern day style of college basketball with. But unfortunately for him, he wasn't able to do that, and Florida just played so slow. They never played the ball they never pushed the ball off the floor. And when you're a team like the Gators that has such trouble moving and scoring the ball offensively, I just didn't get that strategy. Right now, Andrew Nebhart is kind of 50-50 on whether he's going to be back or not. But at the same time, if he's back or not, Mike White needs to lead Florida to the NCAA tournament next season. That's a given. There is still plenty of talent on this team. Trey Mann, Scotty Lewis, Nebhart if he comes back, Omar Payne, a good young big man. They also bring in a couple guys. They bring in a couple really good freshmen, a couple transfers. Tyree Appleby from Cleveland State is the main one. And when you combine that with Omar Payne, you combine that with Noah Locke coming back. Hopefully he has a bounce back season. I think if you're a Florida fan, after what he did his freshman year, you were probably expecting him to break out a little bit last year. Unfortunately, that was not the case for him. And I just think this whole team, including their coach, needs to be better if Florida wants to be successful in 2021. And then finally, moving on to the team in the Big Ten that I think is under the most pressure to succeed in 2021, that would actually be Richard Pitino and his Minnesota Golden Gophers. And I think earlier in the season, it was going pretty well for Minnesota. I loved their top three with Carr, Kalsher, and Oturu, and I thought they could be a tournament team, but they were just one of the teams, and everyone knew it, right? This past season, the Big Ten was so good and so deep that you just knew and you just thought eventually, okay, one of these teams is going to have to decline a little bit and maybe miss the NCAA tournament. And I think that was Minnesota. Now, unfortunately for their coach, Rich Pitino, I think Minnesota fans have kind of treated him a little unfairly over the past couple seasons. Like, he did a nice job leading them to the tournament as a 5 seed in 16-17 when not a lot of people really expected them to be any good. Now, the following year, it was a big dud. And then he made the tournament in 2019. Probably would have missed in 2020. But at the same time, like, if Minnesota misses the tournament this upcoming season, I don't think I would fire Richard Pitino if I was them. But at the same time, I would maybe start heating up his seat a little bit because he has been able to bring in talent, and it's not like it's been an all-and-out disaster since he's gotten the job. Like, if Danny Manning could stay the head coach of Wake for as long as he did, and there have been plenty of other examples, like Tim Miles at Nebraska, he was there for a while without winning an NCAA tournament game, and Pitino has won an NCAA tournament game since he's gotten the job. It's not like he's been that bad. So I actually like Rich Pitino, but going back to Minnesota, I think they should be solid because Marcus Carr right now technically is enrolled in the NBA draft, but he should be back. You pair him with the shooter and Gabe Kalsher. Obviously, yes, the Big Ten is a very tough league, but I think Minnesota should be solid next year, and I think their fans should expect to make the NCAA tournament.